The door closes behind you and something in your chest unclenches. You didn't even realize you were holding it. That tension, that low hum of vigilance that follows you through every grocery store run, every work meeting, every dinner with friends who still feel like strangers in some way you can't fully explain. But now you're home, and for the first time in hours, your body remembers how to breathe at its own pace. If you've been through a genuine psychological awakening, you know this feeling. The relief of returning to your own space, the almost physical decompression that starts the moment you're alone, and you've probably noticed it getting stronger, the preference for staying in, the slow, quiet withdrawal from social calendars, the realization that what used to energize you, parties, gatherings, even casual hangouts, now costs you something you can't afford to keep spending. People around you have noticed too. They're worried, some of them. They think you're isolating, depressed, becoming antisocial. They say things like, "You need to get out more," with that concerned look that actually makes you feel worse, because you know they're measuring your health by a standard that doesn't apply to you anymore. Jung would have understood what's happening to you. He spent years studying what occurs inside people who undergo genuine psychological transformation. And one of the patterns he documented most carefully was this exact withdrawal. The awakened person pulling back from the world, choosing solitude with increasing conviction, preferring the stillness of their own space over almost any social offering. And what Jung found was that this retreat had almost nothing to do with fear, depression, or social dysfunction. It was one of the most sophisticated psychological responses he'd ever observed. Today, I'm going to show you what Jung actually discovered about why awakened empaths gravitate toward home, what's happening in your psychology and nervous system that makes solitude feel essential rather than optional, and why the people telling you to get out more are accidentally asking you to betray the most important transformation of your life. To understand why awakened empaths prefer staying home, you first need to understand what changed in them. Because something did change, something fundamental, and it altered the way they experience every room they walk into, every conversation they enter, every environment they inhabit. Jung observed that before awakening, most empaths operated in what he called unconscious absorption. They moved through social environments soaking up emotional information without realizing they were doing it. They'd arrive at a party feeling fine, and leave feeling drained, anxious, or inexplicably sad. And they'd attribute it to their own mood, rather than recognizing they'd been processing the emotional states of every person they'd interacted with. This unconscious absorption has a strange side effect. It actually makes social environments feel normal, even necessary. When you don't know you're absorbing, you don't know what's costing you. You just know you feel things intensely in social settings, and you assume that's what connection feels like. The exhaustion afterward seems like a reasonable price for belonging. But awakening disrupts this entire system. Once an empath becomes conscious of what they're actually doing in social environments, perceiving emotional undercurrents, reading psychological patterns, sensing the gap between what people perform and what they actually feel, the experience of being around others changes completely. You go from unconsciously absorbing to consciously perceiving. And conscious perception is a fundamentally different experience. Jung described it like this. Imagine you've spent your entire life in a room with a loud television playing in the background. You've adapted to it. You've built your life around it. You don't even hear it anymore. Then one day, something shifts and you suddenly hear the television clearly for the first time. The volume hasn't changed. Your awareness of it has. And now you can't unhear it. Every room you walk into, you hear the noise that was always there, but now it's unbearable because you're actually processing it. That's what happens to awakened empaths in social environments. The emotional noise was always there, they were always absorbing it, but now they're aware of the absorption, and awareness makes the volume feel 10 times louder. Every interaction carries layers of information they can't ignore. Every gathering becomes a barrage of emotional data that their newly conscious mind insists on processing rather than letting wash through unexamined. This is why home starts to feel like oxygen. Home is the one environment where the television is off, where the emotional noise drops to a level their system can manage, where they can finally hear their own thoughts, feel their own feelings, exist inside their own experience without the constant overlay of everyone else's psychological reality. Jung was careful to distinguish this from introversion, because the distinction matters. Introverts are energized by solitude as a baseline personality trait. What awakened empaths experience runs deeper than temperament. They're undergoing a fundamental reorganization of how their consciousness interfaces with the world, and solitude is where that reorganization happens. You can't rebuild the engine while the car is still driving. You have to pull over. You have to stop. And that's what staying home actually is for the awakened empath. Pulling over. Giving the system time and space to complete a transformation that social environments constantly interrupt. But there's another layer to this that Jung documented extensively, and it has to do with what he called the persona, the social mask everyone wears in public. Jung understood that every person maintains a persona, a curated version of themselves designed for social consumption. This is normal and necessary. You behave differently at work than you do with your closest friend. You present a certain face to strangers that differs from the face your family sees. The persona is how humans navigate social complexity without exposing their entire psyche to every person they encounter. Before awakening, empaths maintained their personas just like everyone else. They had their social selves, their performing selves, the version that smiled at the right moments and said the expected things and played whatever role the situation required. And maintaining this persona felt automatic, effortless even. Because when you're unconscious of the performance runs itself. Awakening shatters this automation. Once you become conscious of your own persona, once you can see the mask while you're wearing it becomes almost physically uncomfortable. You're at dinner with colleagues, and you can feel yourself performing interest in conversation that means nothing to you. You're at a family gathering, and you can feel the false self sliding into place like a costume you've outgrown. You're saying things you don't mean, laughing at things you don't find funny, participating in social rituals that suddenly feel hollow and exhausting. Jung documented that this awareness of one's own persona is one of the most disorienting experiences in the individuation process, because you can't go back to unconscious performance once you've seen through it. But you also can't just stop performing in environments that expect performance. So you're caught in this impossible middle ground where every social interaction requires you to be someone you can no longer pretend to be, and the effort of that pretending drains you in ways it never did before. Home is where the persona drops, where you don't have to perform for anyone, where you can sit in silence without that silence being interpreted as rudeness or sadness or disengagement, where the mask comes off and your face can just be your face. Jung would have called this the beginning of individuation's practical cost. Becoming yourself is the goal of psychological development, but becoming yourself in a world that runs on personas means that every social environment becomes a place where you're swimming against the current. The world wants your mask. Home lets you take it off. This creates something that people around the awakened empath misinterpret constantly. They see someone who used to be social, outgoing, engaged, and they see that person pulling away. They assume something is wrong because withdrawal is supposed to signal problems. In their framework, a healthy person goes out, connects, participates. A person who stays home is struggling. But Jung observed the opposite. For the awakened empath, staying home often signals the healthiest choice they've ever made. They're finally choosing their own experience over social expectation. They're finally prioritizing their actual state over performing wellness for an audience. They're choosing real quiet over performed engagement. And that choice, that willingness to let people worry about you rather than exhaust yourself maintaining an illusion of normalcy, takes more psychological strength than anyone watching from the outside realizes. There's a third dimension to this that goes even deeper, and it's the one Jung found most fascinating. It has to do with what the awakened empath actually perceives in social environments, and why that perception makes ordinary social life almost unbearable. Before awakening, the empath sensed emotional atmospheres vaguely, like background music. After awakening, they perceive specific psychological patterns with startling clarity. They sit across from someone at dinner, and they don't just feel that person's anxiety, They see the architecture of it, the childhood wound driving it, the defense mechanism managing it, the persona compensating for it, the gap between who that person is performing and who they actually are underneath. Multiply that by every person in the room. Jung described this as dimensional perception, the capacity to see multiple layers of psychological reality simultaneously. And he noted that people with this capacity face a specific problem in social settings. They can't participate in the surface-level exchanges that social life requires because they're perpetually aware of what's happening underneath. Imagine trying to enjoy small talk while you can see that the person making it is barely holding together. Imagine trying to laugh at a joke while you perceive the desperation behind the humor. Imagine attending a celebration while sensing the three people in the room whose marriages are failing, the one person whose depression is worsening, the host whose cheerfulness is a performance covering genuine despair. You see all of it, simultaneously, and you can't switch it off. This is a kind of perceptual overwhelm that people without dimensional perception simply cannot understand. They tell you to relax, to stop overthinking, to just enjoy yourself, and you would love to. You remember what that felt like, being able to take a conversation at face value, to enjoy a gathering without processing everyone's hidden psychological reality, to exist on the surface where things are lighter and simpler. But awakening took that option away. You can't unknow what your perception now shows you constantly. Home is the only environment where this perceptual system gets to rest, where the input drops low enough for your consciousness to stop working overtime, where you can sit with a book or a cup of tea and the only psychological reality you're processing is your own. The relief of this is so profound that it starts to restructure your entire life around protecting it. Jung documented that this restructuring was healthy and necessary, but he also acknowledged something important. It can become a trap if the empath doesn't understand what's driving it. There's a crucial difference between choosing solitude as a conscious practice, understanding what your system needs and providing it, and retreating into solitude as avoidance of the world. Jung was honest about the fact that some empaths use their awakening as justification for hiding. The perceptual overwhelm is real, the social cost is real, the exhaustion is real. But some empaths take these legitimate experiences and build a fortress out of them, convincing themselves that the world has nothing left to offer, when really they're afraid of the vulnerability that engagement requires. Jung called this the shadow side of withdrawal. The awakened empath who stays home because their system needs recovery is making a wise choice. The awakened empath who stays home because they've decided the entire world is too unconscious to bother with is making an ego choice dressed up as wisdom. And the line between these two can be hard to see from inside the experience. The difference shows up in how you feel about your solitude. Healthy withdrawal feels peaceful, restorative, generative. You come back to yourself, you process, you create, you rest. And when you do venture out, you can engage authentically, even if briefly. Shadow withdrawal feels rigid, superior, and tinged with contempt. You stay home because people are too much, or too asleep, or not worth your energy. And the longer you stay in, the more the world shrinks until your home becomes less sanctuary and more prison. Jung warned that the awakened empath has to watch for this constantly, because their legitimate perceptual gifts make the superiority trap incredibly seductive. When you can genuinely see more than most people, it's easy to slide from, "I need space to process," into, "I'm too evolved for ordinary social life." The first is self-care. The second is inflation, and inflation is the ego's most sophisticated disguise. The way to tell the difference in yourself is simple but uncomfortable. Ask, does my solitude make me more compassionate toward others, or more dismissive of them? Healthy solitude, the kind Jung advocated, should increase your capacity for genuine connection, even if it decreases the quantity of your connections. If staying home is making you gentler toward the world, it's serving you. If it's making you harder, something has gone sideways. If you've been sitting with these questions, wondering whether your withdrawal is wisdom or avoidance, trying to understand what your awakening actually changed in you. There's a set of 24 reflection exercises in True Self-Discovery, built around the same Jungian principles we're exploring here, that can help you trace the honest answers. Click below to get it. Now, there's something else Jung observed about awakened empaths and their relationship to home that rarely gets discussed, and it has to do with what actually happens during their solitude. Because the people who worry about them assume they're doing nothing, stagnating, withdrawing from life. But Jung found the opposite. Awakened empaths in solitude are doing some of the most intensive psychological work a human being can do. They're processing, integrating, working through shadow material that surfaced during their interactions with others, making connections between patterns they observed and patterns in their own psyche. Their solitude looks like rest from the outside, but from the inside, it's often more demanding than any social engagement. Jung called this active introversion, a state where the psyche turns inward to do the work of individuation. Dreams become more vivid and psychologically significant. Insights arrive during quiet moments. Old memories resurface for reprocessing. The empath's time alone becomes a kind of ongoing psychological workshop where the material of their life gets sorted, examined, and integrated at a level that social busyness would make impossible. This is why awakened empaths often report that their richest experiences happen at home. They read something and it rearranges their understanding of their entire childhood. They sit in silence and suddenly see a pattern they've been repeating for decades. They write in a journal and discover they know things they didn't know they knew. The inner world becomes more vivid, more textured, more meaningful than the outer world. And this isn't escapism. It's the natural consequence of a psyche that's turned its considerable perceptual power inward. Jung believed this inward turn was essential to individuation. You can't become whole while constantly processing external stimulation. The psyche needs periods of reduced input to do its deepest work, the same way sleep is necessary for memory consolidation. The awakened empath's preference for home is, in this sense, their psyche demanding the conditions it needs to complete the transformation that awakening began. But here's what makes this so difficult socially. The outer world doesn't value inner work. There's no metric for it. No visible product, no way to explain to someone who asks, "What did you do this weekend?" that you spent Saturday morning sitting with a grief you didn't know you carried until it surfaced during a dream, and that processing it shifted something fundamental in how you relate to your own history. You can't say that. So you say, "Not much," and they look at you with that concern again, that worry that you're wasting your life. And you feel the gap between your experience and their understanding widen a little more. Jung observed that this gap, between the awakened empath's inner richness and the outer world's inability to see or value it, was one of the primary sources of the empath's sense of alienation. They're not lonely because they lack connection. They're lonely because the most significant things happening in their life are invisible to everyone around them. Their deepest experiences are unhearable. Their most important work is unrecognizable, and so they retreat further into the only place where that work can continue uninterrupted and unjudged. There's a practical element to this that Jung also addressed, and it's worth examining because it affects awakened empaths daily. After consciousness shifts, the empath's tolerance for inauthenticity drops dramatically, and modern social life is built almost entirely on inauthenticity. Think about what an ordinary social interaction requires. You greet someone with, "How are you?" and they say, "Good, you?" And you say, "Good," and neither of you means it, and both of you know neither of you means it. This exchange is a social ritual, a persona greeting a persona. Before awakening, this felt natural. After awakening, it feels like a small lie you have to tell 15 times a day, and each small lie costs something. Multiply this across an entire day of social interaction. The performed enthusiasm at work, the polite laughter, the pretended interest, the managed expressions, the careful curation of which thoughts you share and which you keep hidden because they'd make people uncomfortable. Every single one of these moments requires the awakened empath to suppress what they actually perceive and feel in order to maintain social function. And by the end of the day, the the suppression debt is enormous. Home is where you pay off that debt, where you stop suppressing, stop performing, stop managing other people's comfort, where you can think what you actually think, feel what you actually feel, sit in whatever state your psyche is actually in without adjusting it for an audience. Jung recognized that this need for authenticity would inevitably drive the individuating person away from social environments that demanded constant performance. He didn't see this as pathology. He saw it as integrity, the psyche refusing to sustain a way of being that contradicts its newfound consciousness. Your system is essentially saying, I can't keep pretending and staying healthy. Something has to give. And what gives, for most awakened empaths, is the social calendar. This is also why awakened empaths often find that the relationships they maintain become far fewer but far deeper. They can't do surface anymore. They can't do small talk without feeling the falseness of it in their body. So, they naturally gravitate toward the rare people who can meet them in authenticity, the ones they don't have to perform for, the ones who can handle real conversation, real silence, real presence without filler. And often, they find they can meet those people just as well, sometimes better, through a phone call from their couch, a long message exchange, a quiet visit in a kitchen rather than a loud gathering in a restaurant. The setting matters less than the quality of presence, and home, for the awakened empath, provides the baseline of safety that makes genuine presence possible. Jung also documented something that connects all of this to the empath's childhood, and it adds another layer to why home becomes so central after awakening. Most empaths develop their sensitivity in environments where home wasn't safe. The hypervigilance, the emotional radar, the constant scanning of atmosphere for threats, these all developed in childhood homes that were unpredictable, emotionally volatile, or psychologically unsafe. The empath's nervous system was forged in a home that required constant alertness rather than rest. After awakening, after doing the psychological work of facing these patterns and integrating the wounds they created, something remarkable happens. The empath begins, often for the first time in their life, to create a home that feels safe, a space that represents what they never had as children, a place where the atmosphere is theirs to set, where no one else's emotional volatility dictates the energy, where they can finally experience what their nervous system never got to experience growing up, a home that is actually restful. Jung observed that this was deeply healing and deeply necessary. The awakened empath creating a peaceful home environment was, in a very real psychological sense, reparenting themselves, giving their nervous system the experience of safety it was denied in childhood, building, brick by brick, the sanctuary they always needed but never had. And of course, they don't want to leave it. They're experiencing something their body has waited decades to feel. Home, real home, safe home, chosen home, is a revelation to a nervous system that grew up in a war zone. This is why telling an awakened empath to get out more can feel so tone-deaf. You're asking them to leave the first truly safe place they've ever built. You're asking them to trade the healing their nervous system is finally receiving for social stimulation their nervous system experiences as assault. You mean well, but you're measuring their health by your standard, and your standard doesn't account for what their body has been through or what it needs now. Jung would have said that the awakened empath's task isn't to force themselves back into the world on the world's terms. Their task is to build a relationship with solitude that serves their individuation, and then, from that grounded place, to choose when and how they engage with the world outside. The engagement looks different than it used to, less frequent, more intentional, shorter in duration, deeper in quality, and always with a return to home, to the place where the mask drops and the processing continues and the real self gets to just exist. There's one more thing Jung noticed about this pattern, and it might be the most important piece. Awakened empaths who honor their need for home, who stop fighting the preference and start building their life around it, become extraordinarily productive in ways the world underestimates. Their solitude produces things: insight, creativity, clarity, the kind of deep thinking that only happens when the mind isn't being constantly interrupted by social input. Some of the most significant creative, intellectual, and psychological work in human history was produced by people who spent enormous amounts of time alone. Jung himself was one of them. His most profound work emerged during periods of deliberate isolation, including the years-long inward journey that produced the Red Book, a document so psychologically intense that it wasn't published until decades after his death. The awakened empath staying home isn't wasting time. They're composting experience, processing the raw material of their perception into something refined: understanding, wisdom, creative output, psychological integration. This composting requires exactly what home provides: time, stillness, safety, and the absence of external demands. If someone had told Jung that his years of intense solitary work were unhealthy, that he needed to socialize more, that staying in his study was a sign of dysfunction, he would have recognized the criticism for what it was: a worldview that equates health with extroversion and productivity with visibility. A worldview that can't recognize the value of inner work, because inner work produces nothing that can be measured by anyone standing outside it. The awakened empath faces this same misunderstanding constantly, and Jung's answer was the same then as it would be now: trust the process. Your psyche knows what it needs. If your solitude is producing peace, clarity, and a deepening relationship with your own consciousness, if you emerge from your time alone feeling more like yourself rather than less, then what you're doing at home is among the most important work of your life, regardless of who understands it. The world will tell you that staying home means you're shrinking. Jung would tell you that for the awakened empath, staying home is often how you finally start growing, inward, where the growth that matters most has always happened. So if you've been feeling the pull toward home, toward quiet, toward the simple relief of closing the door and being alone with yourself, and if that pull has been getting stronger as your awareness deepens, know that what you're experiencing has a name, a history, and a purpose. Jung documented it, he understood it, and he recognized it as one of the clearest signs that individuation is underway. You're not broken for wanting to stay home. You're not depressed because Saturday night looks like a book and silence instead of a bar and conversation. You're not failing at life because your world has gotten smaller on the outside. Something inside you is doing exactly what it needs to do, and it's asking for the one thing that most of the world won't give it permission to have: space. Give it space. Your home has become the workshop where the most essential version of yourself is being assembled. The door you close behind you every evening isn't shutting out the world. It's holding space for a process that the world doesn't know how to value yet. And the relief you feel when that door clicks shut, that unclenching in your chest, that first full breath, that's your psyche telling you it can finally get back to work. Jung spent his career arguing that the inner life deserved the same respect as the outer one, that psychological development was real development, even when no one else could see it, that the person sitting quietly in their own home, doing the invisible work of becoming whole, was engaged in something as significant as anything happening in the loudest, busiest room in the world. He was right, and if you've been waiting for permission to trust what your own experience has been telling you, here it is. Stay home, rest, process. Let the transformation do what it's doing. The people who matter will still be there when you're ready. And when you do open that door again, on your terms, in your timing, you'll bring something with you that only solitude could have built. If you've been sitting with all of this, feeling seen in it, maybe for the first time, true self-discovery was built for exactly this stage of the journey. 24 Jungian reflection exercises designed to meet you where you are, in the quiet, in the solitude, in the honest inner work that's already underway. Click below to get it.